afternoon, everyone. My name is Terry Lewis. I'm a curriculum and instruction specialist at IU13, and I'd like to welcome you to our session. And the session is, will I be teaching face-to-face or virtually? Planning for primary instruction, regardless of the mode. So we're going to be talking a little bit about all the different scenarios that we could be facing in the fall and how that might look for primary ELA instruction. So welcome. Here is a link to our session links that we're going to be using today. If you are joining us face-to-face, I will be including each of these links separately in the chat box. But if you are joining us virtually later, viewing the recording, you'll want to use this link to get to the links that we're going to be using today. So here are our objectives for today's session. We're going to be exploring planning for ELA instruction in any learning environment. We're going to introduce or review, if you're already familiar with the 5 E's of lesson design. And we're going to experience the 5 E's in a virtual foundational skills lesson, and then discuss how we might also apply the 5 E's to a live or virtual comprehension lesson for primary students. So we're going to start with a jigsaw. If you haven't already signed up for Seesaw as a student, I'm going to give you a minute to do this. If you already are signed up with Seesaw as a teacher, then you may want to just use the links that I'm going to provide on the link page, and I will put that link in the chat. But if you could join as a student, either with a different email address, or if you don't have an account already, sign up as a student, so then you can go through the activities as a student. So I'll give you a minute to do this. And if you could just either give me a thumbs up or jot in the chat box if you are ready to move on. Okay, it looks like some of you are still finishing up, but I'm going to go ahead and give the directions. So once you're in Seesaw, if you would click activities, and then the very first activity at the top is a 5E jigsaw. And I'm going to ask Brittany if you could read about engage.
Sure.
Emily, if you could read about explore. Gina, if you could read about explain. Jennifer, if you could read about elaborate. And I think there's one other person that I can't see their name. If you could read about evaluate. And then you're going to click on the link for the Jamboard, which is also in the directions of Seesaw, but I will also put these 2 links in the chat in case you're having trouble getting into Seesaw. You can just use these links. So the article, there's a paragraph about each E here that you're going to read. And on the Jamboard, let me just show you. You're going to find your slide. So if you read about engage, you'll use this slide, or you can click up at the top to get to the next slide. And you're going to click on the sticky note, and you're going to type, what is the explore or engage, or what is your E that you read about? And then what does it look like in your classroom currently? And when I mean currently, I mean before the pandemic. So what did the explore phase look like for your instruction in the past? Okay, so I'll give you a few minutes. Does anyone have any questions about what you're asked to do? Okay, so I'll give you a few minutes and then we will talk through it. Emily, I see your question and I'm not sure I remember who is doing which E, and I think maybe you left. So let's take 2 more minutes. All right. So let's talk a little bit about these. So, Brittany, I believe you started with Engage. Is that right? Can you talk a little bit about what Engage is and what it's looked like for you in the past?
Yeah, so our district uses, or in the past, we have been very learning focused with essential questions, activating strategies. So engaging to me and what we read is kind of like activating the students' prior knowledge to hook them at the start of the lesson, to kind of get them excited about what they would look like. So something like that might be a turn and talk, a think, pair, share. There might be a short video clip, a KWL chart. It could be a read aloud, a poem, answering questions on whiteboard. So just kind of getting their brains activated to get started.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay, we'll come back to Explore. How about Explain? Can whoever completed this chart share?
Yeah, that's me. So explain is when students synthesize their new knowledge and ask questions for understanding. So it said in the article to make sure that teachers ask about what students learned in the explore phase before the direct teaching of the content. And what it looks like in the classroom is that it's very teacher-led. The teacher shows videos and other visuals to help increase the understanding of content. And something I didn't include on here that I thought about later was using something like Seesaw to share resources and different materials that way too.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Okay, so I don't think anyone got to the others as well. So we will talk about those together. So just to summarize what Gina and Brittany have shared and also add in the other ones. Brittany talked about engage being that accessing prior knowledge, that getting the students excited about learning, sharing the learning targets and goals. So that's a really important part of the engage phase. Explore, this is when we maybe are doing some inquiry or research or having students do some discussions and conversation about a topic. Then we move to the explain phase that Gina discussed. And in this component, the students are both sharing and explaining what they have learned in their explore phase, as well as the teacher providing direct instruction to the students. In the elaborate phase, this is when we want to make connections or help students make connections to what they already know and apply their learning, maybe in a new context or a new text. And then for evaluate, this is where we ask students to reflect on their learning or provide some kind of formative assessment to ensure students learned what we intended for them to learn. So when we think about the 5 E's, this is just strong instruction that we use all the time, right? Or that we have used in the past. That's why we wanted to connect to what we already know or what we've already done. So when we think about transitioning to potentially remote learning, we need to think about some of those things. So what are the learning goals in this lesson? Will the learning be synchronous or asynchronous? So will we have our students in front of us through Zoom? Are we all going to be together? Or are students going to be working independently with any support or no support? What tools are available and which can you or your students already use or are easy to learn? So we're going to be focusing today on Seesaw, but other tools can also be utilized. But which tools do your students already know? What tools are available and what can students learn pretty easily? And then what can students do independently and with what will they need support? So if it's a completely asynchronous activity, they should be able to use the tool and be able to complete that assignment or that activity with very little support, or will they need support from someone at home? And that leads us to our last question. What could students do independently with appropriate scaffolding? So what would that scaffolding be? Could it be you reading the directions to them through Seesaw, or are they going to need additional supports? So when we think about this in an explicit phonics lesson, we think about what are the components of an effective phonics lesson and how do they relate to the 5 E's? So you'll see in this phonics lesson example, I switched explain and explore because in an explicit phonics lesson, there's really no reason for inquiry and having students guess or try to figure out. There are some instances in which word sorting and things like that could fall into that category, which actually I did include in this lesson. But I think it's more important in a direct explicit primary phonics lesson to teach the pattern explicitly before we get into the inquiry part of the lesson. So in our engage phase, we have a welcome and a warm up and a phonological awareness review. Then I go into an explanation phase where we're teaching the letter sound correspondence and the word reading. And then in the explore phase, there's some word work, which in this case will be sorting. And they'll elaborate and extend their learning through dictation and text reading, and then we'll come back and evaluate. So we're going to go through this in a phonics lesson on Seesaw that I created, and I'm going to walk you through it rather than all just going through by ourselves. But as I do, I'd like you to think about what activities would work for your grade level. What scaffolding would your students or families need to complete these activities? What might you change? And what might you use regardless if you're in a virtual environment or a face-to-face environment? Could you use these activities either way? Okay. I'm going to stop before I go through this to see if there are any questions. Okay, so if you are in Seesaw as a student, you can follow the steps with me, or you can just watch as I go through the steps. So our first activity is just a welcome. It's a answer garden. For each of the activities, I have myself recorded reading these directions. So I'm not going to play the recording. It's just my voice reading these directions, right? So the first prompt is, what was the best thing that happened to you since yesterday? So again, just a little bit of a connection with the students, what's going on, what's happening with them. And the student would click add response. And I guess I have to pick who I am here. And oh, there we go. You have to click on the answer garden, right? And they type in a response. So I took a walk with my, you have to be only a few characters, so took a walk. And then they would just enter, submit. And then others would also answer, so you could see what your students are up to and also just get them, kind of involved in the lesson from the beginning. So then we're going to move into a long and short A picture sort. So we're going to be, this lesson is revolved around spellings of long A. So I want to first review long and short A sounds. So again, I'm going to click add a response. I could hear all the instructions and the student can listen to me read the instructions, but today we will learn about 2 new ways to spell the sound A. Let's listen for the long and short sounds of A. Acorn begins with a long A sound. Apple begins with a short A sound. Sort the pictures. If the word has a long A sound, drag it under the acorn. If it has a short A sound, drag it under the apple. Say rain. I hear the long A sound in rain, so I would drag the picture of the rain under the acorn. Say crab. I hear the short A sound in crab, so I would drag the picture of the crab under the apple. Now it's your turn. The pictures are snail, play, bat, nail, bag, flag. Sort the pictures that have the long A sound under the acorn and those that have a short A sound under the apple. So again, the students would click this picture of the hand, and then that would highlight the items. So rain, A, rain, under acorn, bag, under apple, and they would continue through each item. And then they click the green check mark when they're finished. So those two first activities were part of the engaged phase. Get them started, warmed up, etc. Now we're going to move into the explain phase. Remember, we switched explain and explore for these activities. Okay, so the next one are new spellings of long A. So we've already learned that A can be spelled with an A, like in maple, or A consonant E, like in make. Today we are going to learn two new ways to spell A, AI and AY. So use the highlighter to highlight the AI or AY in each word. And when you see A or AI or AY, say A, okay? So we're going to click on add response. And then we're going to use the highlighter to highlight anytime you see AY and say A, or AI, A, 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 okay? When they're finished with all their highlighting and saying A, click the green arrow or the green check, okay? Whoops. All right, and then the next part is word reading. And here I used a video of myself. So I'm going to just show you a little bit of that. Let's read some words with the long A sound spelled with AI and AY. I'll read some first. Then we will read some together. Then you will read some on your own. My turn. Sound, A, word, day. Sound, A, word, gray. Sound, A, word, rain. Our turn. Say it with me. Sound, A, word, May. Sound, A, word, gale. Sound, A, word, play. Now it's your turn. Sound, word. Okay, so you get the picture there. So again, in these two activities, we are in the explain phase. So we are talking about how to spell A with the new spellings AI and AY, and then reading words together. Then in the next activity, we're going to move into the explore phase where they're going to do a word sort. So we're going to sort the words by how the long A sound is spelled and then see if there's a pattern. So again, play is spelled with an AY, train, AI. So here we want them to be able to explain that AI is found in the middle of the word and AY is found at the end of the word. And then we have dictation. So again, here I model. The students are going to need a whiteboard and marker or a paper and pencil. And I say a word and they write it. First I model this video, and then they're actually going to do the writing and then take a picture of their work, okay? And that's submitted straight to Seesaw so you can see what they're writing, whether it's on a whiteboard or paper and pencil. And then finally, text reading is in the elaborate phase as well. So in the text, they're to use a highlighter to highlight any words with the long A sound spelled AI or AY. Read the words that were highlighted out loud. And then when they're ready, they use the microphone to record themselves reading the story. Okay. And then we end the lesson with the reflection. and they share what they learned today. What are 2 new ways to spell the long A sound, and when do you use each one? They can use the microphone to record their response, or they can type, so they can decide. So that takes us through all 5 E's of this lesson. So I'm going to stop to see, are there any questions? Either you can unmute or type in the chat.
Harry, how long do you envision this lesson taking, like, for a child?
I would say probably at least a half an hour.
So
So
it'd be like just one lesson per day type of thing?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And on the link that I shared at the beginning, or maybe I didn't, the tiny URL, but I'm going to also put the link in the chat box right now. In this document, which is this document right here, all those activities I just did, you see as a student, these are all those same activities as a teacher. So once you have a teacher account, if you open this, you can save this to your library and just change out the sounds or the spellings, or etc. But each of your phonics lessons would have these same components probably. So all you'd need to do is switch out the, you know, the actual sound or text.
Okay,
etc.
thank you.
Mm-hmm. So does anyone else have any questions about any of those activities?
Yeah, so I have a question. So you would assign all of these assignments to students to work through at their own pace, correct?
Well, that's a question for this session, right? So depending
Okay.
on your situation, right? If you were all remote, you certainly could do that, right? And if you didn't have any synchronous time with your students. If I did have synchronous time with my students, I would break this up, and instead of having them watch the videos, for example, of the word reading, I would do that with the students and through Zoom or face-to-face if that was available.
Okay.
I would decide which activities could be done face-to-face or synchronously if I had those options. If I didn't have those options, I was completely remote and everyone was on their own time, I would just assign all of this and then they could do it at their own pace.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. And knowing your students and your grade level, you might say, you know, you do these 2 activities, you know, today or tomorrow, you know, these tomorrow,
Right.
etc. Yeah, you might have to break it up.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. So any other questions? All right, so let's go back to, so let's just have a quick conversation. You asked some questions already, but did you see activities in this Seesaw lesson that would work for your grade level?
Yeah, I teach first grade, and I used some of the similar activities last year when we were online, like the sorts, the word sorts and picture sorts and things like that. One thing I did include sometimes in my Seesaw activities was a video of me modeling it if I couldn't be there live to model it. So that was a scaffold that I added for some of my kids because I had the below level learners. So, but I also like recorded my directions, which I thought was a really good idea and a good support for them. But yeah, I would use all those activities for my grade level.
Wonderful. Great. And yes, that's what's nice about Seesaw is that you can model by recording a video. You can read the directions to your students so they don't have to read it on their own.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Great. Anyone else have any ideas or activities that they have used in the past that they'd like to share? All right. Well, then let's move on to talking about how this might look then in a comprehension lesson, right? So again, we have those same 5 E's because that's effective lesson planning regardless of any mode. So we would think about in the engage phase, what might that look like in a comprehension lesson? So that might be establishing purpose for reading, activating prior knowledge, previewing the text for vocabulary or sentence structure or text structure or whatever. Again, in that explain phase, our direct instruction phase, this is where we're going to be modeling our strategy, our skill, maybe how to complete a graphic organizer. Some guided practice would also be important here. And again, if you have any opportunities for face-to-face instruction or synchronized instruction, this is where that would be most appropriate in this explain phase. So if you can't have your students face-to-face or synchronously through Zoom, this would be the place where you might want to include a screencastify video, or through Seesaw, a video of you modeling something. In the elaborate phase, this is where we have our independent practice or maybe our applications to a new text. And an explore or extend, this is where we have any other further learning related to this topic, whatever you're reading about, maybe extension activity. And then of course, evaluate would be that summarizing, reflecting, and assessing student learning. So let's talk through this, maybe how we've done things in the past and maybe how we would adjust in this type of environment. So again, this document, I'm going to put in the chat box. Okay, so this document is what I just posted in the chat. So thinking about what we've already done in the past, we've all been teaching effective lessons throughout our teaching careers, right? So now just thinking about how that would look in a virtual environment, if that's where we will have to be in the fall. So again, in the engage phase, if we're talking about establishing purpose or building background or previewing, some ideas in Seesaw could be a quick write, could be asking a question that they are to answer related to the topic, maybe the K and the W from a KWL chart. What other things are you thinking about that might work as part of the engage phase in a virtual environment? Do you have any other ideas? So again, thinking about any of those other tools that you may use that you saw how we could embed in Seesaw, other things like Answer Garden, or you know, any other types of Google Google products, etc. We can add to things. So we can do brainstorming, you know, through Google Docs. We could do, although if you have Seesaw, that you wouldn't even need to bring in Google Docs or things like that for the most part. So in the explain phase, again, if we're modeling a strategy or skill or a graphic organizer here, probably the best place or the best venue for that E would be a video, right, of yourself modeling something. Or again, if you have a face-to-face opportunity or a synchronous opportunity through Zoom or another platform, this would be the time where you would want to do some modeling for your students. Again, in the elaborate phase, again, if we're going to be applying this to a new text, we might have an audio or video read aloud, maybe with notes about think alouds, right? Maybe students would be creating some kind of shared product, like a summary or a graphic organizer that they could be working on through, say, Google Slides or other tools. So does anyone have any other thoughts or ideas about the elaborate phase digitally, of things that they've used in the past?
I know colleagues of mine have used Flipgrid, which is where they record those small videos. I never used it, but it's something you could do in Seesaw too. They could record a video response or something, so it'd be something similar.
Exactly, right. And in the paid version of Seesaw, they could then see each other's and
Mhm.
comment on each other's work, which would be a really helpful tool.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah.
We've used Padlet before. I don't know if that would be a good place for this, but to like ask questions or to all to contribute to a shared document,
Yeah.
then I mean it's anonymous, but you can at least see other people's ideas.
Yeah, exactly. But Padlet's a great tool as well. The nice thing about Seesaw is many of these things that the flipped grids and the Padlets and things like that, you can actually do the same types of things within Seesaw. So for primary students, it's nice that you don't have to introduce, lots of new tools. Like Gina mentioned, you can certainly do video responses just like you would in Flipgrid right in Seesaw, and also have them comment on one another. So that's good too.
And this doesn't really have to do with what we're talking about, but somebody shared with me, we're using Google Classroom as our main learning platform. And before, if you would link things to Seesaw, it wouldn't take them directly to like an activity or things like that. But I think there's an upgrade now that you can post a link to Seesaw and it will take them right to the activity. So instead of them like looking through their activities, I believe it will take them right there. I don't think it hasn't been rolled out yet, but I think it's coming in like August sometime.
You mean through Google?
No, through Seesaw. So like you should be able to find a link in Seesaw that you can post to Google Classroom
I see.
that will take them into Seesaw exactly where they need to go.
Perfect. Oh, that would
Yeah.
be really nice.
Yeah, so that will make it easier for the first graders to kind of navigate a little bit.
Absolutely. That's wonderful. Good. So the next E is our explore and extend. And this is, when we think about comprehension, you've just read a story about a certain topic or theme, or maybe you read a nonfiction text about plants or animals. So thinking about further learning or extension activities, right? This would be a great place for shared product. So again, if they're creating like a shared set of Google Slides, or making a video together or something like that, this would be a great place to, share what they learned more about animals, etc. So does anyone have any ideas or anything they'd like to share that could be added here? So again, some of those same things that we were just talking about with on Seesaw. So the videos, the shared documents, there's a notes page that they could also add to. They could take pictures and post them of items that they have created or found in their house, anything like that. And then finally in the evaluate phase, this is where we'd have some kind of ticket out the door or shared learning. And again, notes or audio or video recordings are great for this. Google Forms could also be an option for tickets out the door. Any other ideas there? Padlet would work as well. So the important thing is to be thinking about, as you're planning for any environment, is good planning is good planning, right? So we all have to think about our learning goals and think about what we want our students to learn, and think about these 5 E's and how we can utilize good practice that we already have been doing, and how that might look in a virtual environment, if that's the environment that we are teaching in. We certainly, we have opportunities for face-to-face instruction. What would that look like? And even if we were back face-to-face for everything, right, we could still be using tools like Seesaw in centers and in other types of activities. If you're doing rotational learning, these would be some great independent activities for your students. So regardless of the mode, we can still be using these best practices. So does anyone have any other follow-up questions before we summarize our learning? All right, so if we could just do a quick whip around in the chat box, if you could choose one of these prompts. So at first I thought blank, but now I know blank. I wonder blank, or the next step I will take is. Great, so see everyone has a next step that they're going to take using Seesaw and or Google Classroom and thinking about how to use those features and make them manageable for our students. So unless anyone has any final questions, that's all I have for you today. Thank you very much for joining us and good luck in whatever mode you are in the fall. I'm sure that you'll be doing the best you can for your students. So thank you very much. I'll also put my email address in the chat and feel free to reach out if you have any questions. And have a great day.